Good evening, fine peoples.
Good evening.
Oh, that sounded very
We
sinister.
always have to wait and see
Good
if we're really there.
evening. Well, it looks like we are.
Oh, look, there we are.
There we are. That looks like a pair of us, and that looks like a pair of us.
And it says
And
the
apparently-
stream is okay, so we're good.
Well, it's not my hair, but the stream is perfect. I wish this would go away. This looks
It's a
silly,
bump on your
doesn't it?
noggin.
It is. It's like it's got a.
Terrible.
It's got like a crater around it and a lump in the middle.
Well, it's
now.
healing.
It's
healing.
It's healing, yes, but it did
right.
hurt at the time.
Chapter 29.
Chapter 29.
We may or may not finish tonight. We'll see how an hour takes us.
Yep, we will. It's been a fun-filled and fun-packed day, but here we are. So there you go. So chapter 29. So Molly and I settled down to our married life. I in my usual quarters and Molly in Sally's downstairs, for there was no question of sleeping with me. No one who wasn't chloroformed would have got a wink, for I breathe like a bulldog such times as I am asleep, and such times as I am not, I walk about. The moon side of things had faded as if it had never been. Oh, well, that's a throwaway comment, isn't it? Oh, well.
The moon side of things?
Yeah, the whole darn book, it seems to have just gone into his memory now and disappeared. The reconditioning of Cedar House moved slowly. It needed a lot doing to it. Not that I could grumble at that, for I had given next to nothing for it. Moreover, there was a strike in the building trade that held up materials. Perhaps, if truth were known, I lacked the energy to chase the builders as builders needed chasing.
They always do.
Then I wanted to furnish altogether with Queen Anne's stuff. He's got expensive taste, hasn't he? And it had to be picked up gradually. I'm afraid I wasn't taking as much interest in the business as I might have done. And so things dragged along till autumn. And when we were still over at the stables, and then the weather held up the work at the house. There wasn't much to do for an active girl like Molly in my bachelor quarters, especially as she had the tweenie for a maid, and the tweenie shaped up well. So she offered to lend Scotty a hand when he crawled back to work after Easter. Gosh, he was off a while. So that he wouldn't have to break in a new secretary while he was feeling rotten. And somehow or other she stopped on. The only difference from her prenuptial days being that he paid her no salary and she no longer called me Mr. Maxwell. Oh, well, that worked out
He
well.
still doesn't pay her a salary?
She's not paid at all. As a matter of fact, she never called me anything. The circumlocutions she used to avoid addressing me or speaking of me as Wilfred were too marvellous. Apparently she went a very circular route to avoid calling him by his name. Of course, living conditions were better for her than they used to be. I didn't knock her about as Muckley did, nor did I get up to her as often in the night as her mother did. Nor did my profession require me to kill things on the premises, not with an axe anyway, though I dare say we shortened a good few lives indirectly. Scotty would have let a grid in hell as an eligible residence. Scotty would have let a grid in hell as an eligible residence. Oh well, Molly read a lot and we were both keen on the wireless. We used to turn it on at mealtimes. Personally, I think the thing that saved the situation for Molly was keeping on with her work. The thing that saved the situation for me was Mrs. Muckley. There was something about a promise to a dying woman whom you respect that is very binding.
I had no wish to turn up at Heaven's Gate with a bottle nose and an account to her for my dealings with Molly. I had hoped there would be kids to amuse us, but the outlook in that direction didn't appear to be very bright. It is an odd thing that when folk are without benefit of clergy, kids appear at only one remove from spontaneous generation.
What he's trying to say is, if you're not married, you have kids.
Ah, but once you're married, then you don't.
Yeah,
okay.
So to speak.
But when the best thing you could do would be to raise a family, nothing comes of it. And if you try to bludgeon brother ass in these matters, it only starts him backing.
whatever that means. Whoever Brother Ass is, but no.
Well, I guess like you trying to get the donkey to move. I don't know.
Maybe.
This is a very strange thing.
Isn't
anyway, I believe Molly was happiest when I was having my attacks. Sometimes she would take my hand in hers and look at me with a very strange expression on her face. I couldn't ask her what she meant because I couldn't speak. And that is not the sort of thing you could ask in cold blood afterwards. At least I can't. I was horribly shy, and Molly was very reserved, and progress was consequently slow. The condition we settled down to would have been all right for Darby and Joan on their golden wedding day, but was a dashed thin deal for a girl like Molly. Spring mishandled cometh not again. I was damned sorry for her. I had my own youth mishandled and knew what that felt like, but what could I do? The cupboard was bare.
Oh dear.
It's a very strange way of expressing this.
It's just
Well, we have to realize it's 100 years old.
Yeah, it's 100 years old.
I knew
what
from
I'm
my
saying.
experience with Morgan what the relationship between a man and woman could be. Nothing had ever come of my love for Morgan, and I had known all along that nothing ever could. And yet it had lit up my whole life, and for all the pain that came of it, I wouldn't have missed it. There was something that ought to have come across in marriage that is lacking between me and Molly. And yet we had done nothing that we ought not to have done, and left undone nothing that we ought to have done according to the prayer book, and it's pretty
explicit.
The prayer book is pretty explicit? Oh.
Apparently so. I
The
don't know.
thing, as I said before, had never lit up. Yet from the very moment I had laid eyes on Morgan, it had not merely lit up, but it had given off sparks. It was not a thing of the body. It was not even a thing of emotions. It had nothing to do with the intellect, and certainly wasn't spiritual. Then what was it?
What was it indeed?
I could understand now why the old man Coke had gone off with his synthetic charmer. I was in the bonbon box one day getting some sweets for Molly, and the girl said to me, "I suppose our little trip in the car is off now, Mr. Maxwell." "You must ask my wife that question," I said, and she giggled. All the same, she hadn't been far out, and although I would have cut her throat, and mine too, before I would have done such a thing, for I had an enormous respect for Molly, I reckoned that she had spotted my state as her business was.
It was an odd thing that although I thought so much of Molly, she left me absolutely unmoved. Yet synthetic charmers affected me. It was a mystery to me why this should be so. It was certainly the last thing I expected. And it was easy to see how, in the animals, nature uses them. We like to think that we are not only of more worth than many sparrows, but constructed upon entirely different principles, which we are not. You only got to go to watch a cock sparrow to see that. Nature shoves us from behind, and we call it romance. We talk about falling in love as if love occupied a position in space, like a duck pond, whereas the springs of love are in ourselves, and we overflow when the pressure reaches a certain point. Not always with due regard to the sustainability of the recipient, and for the resulting tragedy we blame everything except nature. There is a dashed lot of nature in human nature, as Freud pointed out. Old man Coke had tried to supplement his rations at the bonbon box, and the sole side of his marriage had gone phut in consequence, as anyone but a fool must have known it would. I, on the other hand, without even laying a finger on Morgan, had my soul fertilized. We know that there has got to be give and take on the physical plane if the ovum is to develop into an infant, but there are apparently some queer things that go on in the subtler planes if a marriage is to be a success. I addled my brains to try and make out what Morgan had been driving at. I knew she had in mind a perfectly clear-cut idea of what she meant to do, and that she regarded her relationship with me as the crux of the whole matter. It had been a bit grisly of a vivisection so far as I was concerned, but I knew from her last letter to me that Morgan thought it had gone off all right. Morgan had deliberately made me fall in love with her. That was clear anyway. I'm sorry. Not that it had taken much doing, Dickford having few counter-attractions, but Morgan could have dodged it if she'd have wanted to. It was odd to me that she had not wanted to, for she was kind, and would never have done what she did out of idleness. I had a feeling that she had deliberately steeled herself to hurt me, because she had some very big end in view, just as the Priest of the Moon had had when I took her from Atlantis. Our first Christmas was approaching, and I was dreading it. It was the anniversary of Morgan's passing. I cannot call it her death, for I have never known for certain whether she was dead or not, and the Christmas bells and carols were all associated with that time in my mind. Moreover, I'd got to do something festive for Molly. We were completely outcast in the town.
I didn't mind that in the ordinary way, and neither, I think, did she, being used to it, first for her father's sake and then for her stepfather's. But round about Christmas you feel these things, seeing everyone exchanging peace and goodwill, and being left out of it yourself. I think if my sister had asked me to the Friendly Girls' party that year, I should have attended. But not she. She could not ever forgive me for not having gone to prison for assaulting her.
Oh my.
I went into the bank to get some cash for the festive season, and the cashier told me that the manager wanted to see me. I wondered what in the world he wanted from me. Had my sister let me in for an overdraft? She was quite capable of it. He popped his head out of his sanctum and said, "Look here, Max, whatever it was you put in the strong room has gone moldy. I wish you'd clear it out, or at least clean it up." I went down with him to the nether regions, and there, sitting on a shelf, was the brown paper parcel I had deposited with him that night a year ago. It had gone moldy all right. It was sitting in a pool of its own perspiration, wearing a complete set of gray whiskers. "What in the world is it?" he said. I told him, and he roared. "What has become of the sapphires?" he said. "I suppose they're kicking around at the office in a cardboard box," said I, "unless, of course, Muckley has called while I'd been out. I shall have to take a look for them." Then the caretaker fetched a shovel and shoveled the carcass into the furnace. I went back to the office and took the sapphires and turned out
To look for the sapphires.
to look for the sapphires, and turned out both our desks and the safe, and began to think that Muckley must have been calling when they were discovered on the shelf where we kept the tea things. I took them home and gave them to Molly for a Christmas present. I didn't know what in the world to give her. I had given her so many chocolates I thought she'd be sick if I gave her any more. Besides, I had made up my mind to cut out synthetic charmers as well as whiskey. I did not wish history to repeat itself. I did not want to see Molly open her parcel, which she, not recognizing it, was too busy doing, so went over to the window and looked out. I could tell by the voice of the river that the tide was doing away with the bay, and it was the uttermost ebb just on the turn. And I remembered how the seaward would be slowly swinging round the rocks of the point and streaming the other way as the tide set up the channel.
Then I heard Molly's voice. "Have you read the letter?" said she. "No," said I. She came over and put it in my hand. I continued to look out of the window. So he still has Morgan's letter in the sapphires that he gives to her for Christmas. So it would seem. "Read it," she said. "You've got to, Wilfred." Excuse me. It was the first time I had ever heard us use my name, and it woke me up. I looked at the letter. There was no mistaking the writing. Hadn't I seen it on receipts and instructions ever since I came to the office as an angular adolescent when Molly's father closed the school by bolting? I began to read. "To the one whom these sapphires are given, the soul of a man came into my hands. It is now passing into yours. In order to achieve a certain thing, I sacrificed this man, If I have done my work rightly, the burden of humanity is perhaps a little lighter. The road will not be quite so difficult for those who come after. But that does not help this man. If you can make yourself a priestess of the great spiritual principle which is behind womanhood, you will be able to help him. Meditate upon the moon. She will awaken your womanhood and lend you power. May the great goddess bless you and help you. Do you understand it? Said Molly. Partly, said I. She took the letter away from me and gathered up the sapphires and cleared off to her own quarters, leaving me still gazing out the window. I wasn't upheaved, and I wasn't sulky. I'd just given life up as a bad job. There was nothing I could do about it. The only thing I was worried about was Molly. I was deadly sorry for her. As for me, I'd just gone like perished elastic. Spring mishandled cometh not again. I drove Molly over that afternoon to the carol service at the little old church at Starber. It was our first Christmas and we had to do something about it. I did not particularly fancy going to Dickford Church and being glared at by the vicar. As we drove along the road through the marshes, we could hear the sounds of the bells before and behind us. The Dickford bells gradually dying away and the Starber bells gradually coming clear. Bell Knoll rose up on our left with a bit of mist around its crest, and a haze lay over the levels. Molly broke the silence. I don't talk when I drive. I don't talk much at any time, for that matter.
You will never do any good as long as you stop at Dickford, she said. I can't very well leave it, Molly, I said. It's my bread and butter. We drove on in silence again after that. Away on the right, between us and the sea, was the raw earth ramp of the new coast road at the county council building. I must say I resented that raw scar across the marshes, breaking their ancient peace. I suppose that ribbon building would now string out all along Dickmouth. We called in to the Treaths and gave them their Christmas turkey. They were surprised and not expecting it. They had stood themselves a pheasant. I told them they were to regard it as an
institution. In other words, he's
turkey
going to do it every year.
Okay, sorry. Treath shook his head. We shan't be here next year. At least I hope not, he said. The place is too isolated for them. Mrs. Treath wanted to be near the shops and a cinema, and had decided to go back to their old home in Truro, where all the relatives were. He had been meaning to come and see me as soon as the holidays were over and get me to put the farm on the books. It seemed to mark the breaking of the last link with Morgan, but somehow I didn't mind. I did not mind anything much nowadays, which I don't suppose was a very wholesome symptom. Driving back from the Starber through the dusk, Molly said to me, "Why don't you open a branch in Dickmouth? There isn't really enough for you and Mr. Scott to do at that office. Dickmouth is the coming place." "Filthy hole, Dickmouth," I said. "I hate the place. All asphalt and lodging hours and periours in the summer and wind in the winter. Why don't you buy the farm from the Treaths and let us live there? You could get into Dickmouth very easily from there when the new road is through. Don't you like the idea of living at Cedar House?" "I don't mind. I could be happy anywhere. But you would be much happier at the farm." "How do you know I would, Molly?" "I've been talking to the moon, and she told me."
Oh, well.
What Molly had been saying to the moon, or what the moon had been saying to Molly, I do not know, neither party confiding in me. But if it was half of what the moon said to me when I first made her acquaintance, it must be illuminating.
Ba-dum-ching. Ha-ha.
I owed Molly so much, and there was so little I could do to repay her, that on the rare occasion when she asked me for anything, I felt I ought not refuse. Though I must say I dreaded the idea of the farm. I thought that it would wake all sorts of memories. Moreover, it meant going out of the hands of Beadmore, who was liberal with the morphia.
When he has one of his attacks,
and into the hands of the Dickmouth medico, who wasn't. However, I reckoned I'd thrash through somehow. I always had so far. I dare say it wouldn't be so bad after I had settled it down.
So I bought the farm from the Treths, and Molly saw to the move. It reminded me of taking Mrs. Muckley to the nursing home. Molly got the new offices and engaged the new clerks and saw to the advertising, and chivied up the furniture removers, and even succeeded in making old Bindling trot up the hills, though not down them, in going out to the job. He wasn't the same man since he had lost his son, but his foreman pulled him through, same as Molly did me. Finally, all I had to do was to drive the car from Dickford to the farm, with Molly beside me and the irises at the back. For Molly had dug up half the garden at Cedar House, and we were taking it with us. Strictly illegal, of course, for I had sold the Cedar House to Muckley of all people, he having married a rich widow. God help her. But he didn't know any more about real estate than I knew about pigs. All the same, if he'd have known as much about human nature as I did, he would have kept an eye on Molly when she was looking after my interests. Molly was quite right, I must say. I felt a sense of relief as soon as I arrived at the farm, and it was as if a weight had been rolled from my shoulders, and the asthma was easier immediately. I had spent all my life at Dickford, never getting away from it for more than a fortnight, and all my repressions and frustrations had accumulated around me in a kind of psychological midden. I believe there is a town in Tibet which is supposed to be the dirtiest town on earth. Everybody has chucked their garbage into the street till the muck heap is higher than the houses. That was how it was with me in Dickford.
Now it's in Dickmouth. These are two very strange names.
Aren't they? I had seen farmers in the fields moving the chicken coops so the chicks shall have a fresh run. Molly had very wisely moved my coop.
Ah.
It was really rather nice at the farm. The two spurs of Bellhead between which it lay sheltered us from the prevailing winds and left us open to the sun and the south. Treth had already planted a quantity of silver poplars that thrive like weeds in the sandy soil, and would soon be giving shelter from the summer sun. And there were quick-growing cypress hedges dividing the garden into plots to give shelter from the wind in the winter. The day was one of those spring days when the first touch of strength is coming into the sun, and although the effect was rather pleasant, I made Molly leave her unpacking and stroll with me up to the vine terraces to see how the little vines had fared through the winter, and whether they had lived up to their reputation for hardihood. Poor child, she was pathetically pleased. God knows, it was little enough to be pleased about, but I believe I'd never done anything like that before with her, so I suppose it meant a lot.
The little vines were all tucked up in matting, without even their little noses showing, so we couldn't see how they were. But the grey aromatic herbs are much the same summer and winter, and we picked and crushed in our hands the leaves from our first one and then another, and sampled their savour, aromatic and sweet and lemon-scented. Then we sat down on the seat in the angle under the cliff, and I told Molly how in the days when our island climate was hotter than it is now, the terraces on sunny slopes were used to grow vines. And I showed her how one could tell those terraces from the ones that fringed bare downs and were used to keep off the wolves. She loved it. I don't know that she was especially interested in archaeology, but she loved to hear me wake up and talk. I seldom did, with her, poor child. Then I don't know what possessing me. But it doesn't sound like anyway. I told her why the grey aromatic herbs were grown along the vines and how they were infused in the mulled wine, and she said she would like to try that recipe when the little vines matured, and would I write to Mrs. Treath for it, and I said I would, though privately I thought that my promise to Mrs. Muckley to refrain from fermented liquors might come in uncommon handy. Then I began to tell her what the land had been like in the ancient days, and traced the line of the original Dick for her by the gleam of the standing water. And she too, as Morgan had done, remarked on the straight, hard line of the quay along the winding waterways. And I told her of the Cave Bell Knoll, and the priests and the sea sacrifices and all the ancient worship. And she listened listened like a 2-year child. I wasn't in the least upheaved, though this was the last topic I would have got onto in the cold blood if I had realized where my conversation was taking me, but was immensely interested in it all, and I woke up and became my old self again, like I used to be with Morgan, and all my old enthusiasm came back, and I told Molly that Morgan had left me a whole room full of books and papers that must tackle as soon as we're settled, and there would probably be a lot of awfully interesting stuff among them if we should find when we come to sort them. I told her how I told her how I had seen the cave of Bell Knoll in my vision, and Morgan had seen it in her crystal, and I showed her the fold in the flank of the hill that I thought hid the cave. She was frightfully thrilled and said she couldn't.
She said, couldn't we buy it and excavate?
I said no, better let sleeping dogs lie, and I had enough of that cave and told her of my untimely end therein.
Oh my, he's
thinking,
telling her everything.
Either she thinks he's amazing or nuts.
One of the two, or possibly both, who knows. Then I felt I'd dropped a brick, though I don't think Molly, dear generous soul, looked on it in the least in that light. And I explained to her how the sea priestess had been to me not a woman at all, but all women, a sort of impersonal representation of the woman principle that men idealised as the goddess. Molly looked at me strangely. That was what she said in the letter. She said I ought to think of myself as that, the impersonal representative of the woman principle. So she did, I said, thinking hard. Then we heard the luncheon gong from the farmhouse far below us and started to go down, and Molly skidded on the loose steep surface, and I tucked her under my arm to steady her, and we slid down together. My, don't the sea air suit Mrs. Maxwell? Squeaked the tweenie when we arrived back at the home. Don't it just? Squeaked I. I think that if I hadn't been so abominably shy, I should have kissed Molly. She looked so sweet as she presided over the first meal in her new home. However, I managed to pat her on the back quite spontaneously, and apropos of nothing in particular. Later in the evening, I made a start upon Morgan's papers. For over a year they had lain locked up in one of the attics that Tress did not use, and I've never been able to bring myself to touch them. But now I was eager to be at them, for they no longer seemed reminders of an irreparable loss, but communications from a friend. And among them I found the words of the song she had sung to me. Also, the words of some songs she had not sung to me.
Oh.
I showed all these to Molly and told her about the strange ceremony Morgan had performed before she'd gone out and passed away, and sang her what I could remember of the tune she had used for her chanting. It was an odd tune, on a very limited range of notes, rising and falling by quarter tones. Just a few monotonous musical phrases repeated over and over again in different pitches. And it got you. Kipling speaks of scientific vivisection of one nerve till it is raw, and this was it.
Rowan berry red thread. Sorry.
It was mantra, all right. Western mantra. We sat up talking till nearly 1 that morning. I started to tell Molly of the ancient Atlantis and the way they trained the priestesses there, and how they paid no attention to their inclinations, but paired them off as they saw fit. And that had been Morgan's attitude in the matter, that she did not consider the personality the important thing, but the force. I told her that I hadn't reached that point myself, and I didn't suppose I ever should, but that it could quite see that the force counted as well as the personality. I had enough tact not to mention it to Molly, but in light of our talk, I realised that the pinchbeck Aphrodite in the sweet shop was a transmitter of the force all right, though she very decidedly wasn't a lovable personality, whereas Molly was a very lovable personality, but wasn't a transmitter of the force.
It struck me as an odd thing that the second generation had been within sight of getting left on the shelf of the bonbon box. It was Molly herself who voiced the thing. "I think I have been too nicely brought up," she said. "It was not until I read her letter that I had any idea that I could do anything for a man except love him and look after him. It is a great drawback," she added with a sigh, "to be too well brought up." Then I had my clue. The bonbon boxer, who from the looks of her must have been thoroughly badly brought up, knew how to deliver the goods, and Molly and her mother didn't. For the mother obviously hadn't known any more than Molly, for she hadn't been able to hold her man. Therefore, she hadn't been able to pass the tricks of the trade to her daughter, and the kid was in the what Havelock Ellis calls
erotically illiterate. What a mouthful.
These things may come by instinct, like mousing in kittens, and I believe they do. But if you train a kid away from them the whole time, you produce a state of chronic virginity that nobody can do anything with, and that folks like Old Man Coke bolt into the bonbon box, and we call them wicked. But after all, he had his problems as well as her. What was really needed was a course of Mae West on the pictures for the old grandmother, but then that wasn't a particular solution. God knows I hold no brief for the pictures, but I would just as soon sit in the back kitchen and read penny novelettes as go to them, but they have certainly raised the standard for feminine immorality. It began to dawn on me that the same thing applied to Molly, as Morgan had said flat out and made no bones about, that emotional initiative should rest with the woman, and that the modest woman is the one who has no emotional initiative. It is, of course, her protection when she doesn't want attentions, but the women who are permanently modest in a non-starter in the matrimonial stakes are non-starters in the matrimonial stakes. It was, I think, George Ruby who spoke of the kind of woman you could leave on the bench in Hyde Park after dark when you went for a drink and find her there waiting for you when you came back. Now, what sort of use is that woman to anybody? What use is she, poor soul, to herself? After all, you can hire a cook, and you can engage a housekeeper, and you can phone up an agency for a nurse. Why marry them? This is really in poor taste. I couldn't for the life of me see how I was to put all of this to Molly, and yet it needed putting. She must have had an inkling of it, for she said to me,
"What effect will it have on me, Wilfred, if I meditate on the moon?" I said I didn't know. She'd better try and see, and I would do anything I could to help her. I began to see now the value of a classical education. Old Man Coke, though a BA himself, had given us a strictly modest curriculum, which was considered to be a great advantage in Dickford, as all the lads were sent to him might expect to have their livings to earn in illiberal walks in life. I had only picked up Latin enough to be able to gather the drift of the footnotes to Gibbon, which, though illuminating, are not uplifting. Whereas if you learn to read the ancients in the original, you get a viewpoint which is a very valuable corrective to what passes for ethics in places like Dickford. I sometimes think in this connection of the Kirkcaldy strikes on the railway, which consist of observing literally the safety first rules, with the consequence that all trains run late and some of the goods trains don't run at all. There are some codes that can only be honoured in the breach. In other words, you have to break them for them to work out. So I turned Molly loose on the Loeb Library and let her get on with it, and she changed most remarkably in the course of the next few weeks. They were pretty strenuous weeks, for Molly had been quite right about there being an opening for a house agent at Dickmouth. I had not much of either time or energy to give her, but we were much happier together, and I let her dig among Morgan's papers and books, for I trusted her utterly. What she found, she did not say, and to tell you the truth, I forgot to ask. For I was up to my eyes in trying to persuade, cajole, blackmail, intimidate the Dickmouth Town Council into applying the Town Planning Act to the place before it developed to bungalowed growths in every direction. Then they turned the tables on me by cajoling me into standing for the council, and before I knew where I was a city father. Shades of the black sheep of Dickford. I had never worked so hard in my born days. I had no time to attend to my asthma. It had to fend for itself. Things were much better with me, as I was looked upon as the coming man instead of the black sheep. All the letters of lodgings and takers in of the borders seemed to want someone to give them a lead in building up the place and seeing that its prosperity did not spoil it. And they seemed to think I was their man. It was even suggested in a rash moment that I might stand for Parliament in the socialist interest.
Oh my.
Though why I should be suspected of socialist tendencies I do not know, save that I used to pull the vicar's leg, and if anyone does in a country place, that he is credited with leaning towards anarchy. For it was for that reason I had probably never been made a member of the Labour Club at Dickford. That, and because I am incorrigibly hail fellow well met with all the wrong persons. As a matter of fact, I have no tendencies of any sort.
It made an enormous difference to be in good order for once in my life. I had not realized until I got away from it what a break on the wheel of the general atmosphere of antagonism and disapproval can be, until I kicked over the traces I was always considered more or less than a half-wit.
Oh dear.
My family were responsible for that. They were convinced that I never would and never could grow up. And unless they held me one by either hand, I would sit down with a flop in the nearest puddle and spoil my pants. I think there must have been something pretty tough in me somewhere to have kept alive my self-confidence despite the fact that no one else had any confidence in me. If the whole town sits down round you and steadily, every day, in every way, you get worse and worse, it is bound to affect you if they persevere. People realize the possibility of psychotherapy, but they don't realize what they can do with psychoanalyzing people backwards, which is, in my opinion, on par with putting poison down the well.
Oh dear.
So altogether, things were a lot better with me in every way. My asthma was better, consequently my temper was better, and therefore things were easier for Molly. She had no time to listen to the wireless nowadays, for when I came home, she had to listen to me.
I love it.
I had got over the terrible sense of loss and frustration and emptiness that had simply knocked me flat when I lost Morgan, though I still missed the things she stood for in my life. But although things were going quite decently with Molly and myself, they had never lit up as they had between me and Morgan. I often used to talk to Molly about those days, and they had been well worth having, even if they hadn't lasted. She wasn't in the least jealous of Morgan, which I thought was rather marvelous, and she used to encourage me to talk because she said it gave her ideas. Oh. Once started, I did not need much encouragement. I saw that Molly was taking it all in, but I had no idea what she was making of it. There's no way we can finish the whole book.
We can't finish the book, but I think we can do chapter 30.
Yeah, because
that was a long chapter. That's
that was
40 minutes to read that chapter. Now.
Yeah, but we'll do chapter 30, and then we'll have it.
Yeah, and then we'll have the grand finale next time. How about
two
that?
more chapters
that
for
works.
next time. Yeah.
Chapter 30. Then we came round to Midsummer, and Molly and I got up early on Midsummer Day and went up to the top of Bell Head to see the sun really rise over Bell Knoll, and could have been sighted through the pylon. And we sure enough that it could, and the alignment, if prolonged, went right over the point. And I took Molly out to the point for the first time, and I showed her the flat table of rock where the sea fires were lit, just visible through the shallow water as the level light came over the down. Then we discovered that 2 of the casements were still full of cedar and juniper, and I said I would have it carted back to the farm and we should burn it. Molly asked if I did not know Molly asked if it did not now belong to the National Trust. I said it might, but what the eye did not see, the heart did not worry about. Morality was mine.
No, morally
it was mine, and I was disinclined to spend time or money on legal arguments, having heard so many. Then we went home to breakfast, which by now we needed, and I went off to the office and found myself, in my capacity as city father, let in for a dreadful kind of carnival, and got a lot of confetti down my neck, which made me wild. The charmer who threw it was just such another as my bonbon boxer, but I felt no inclination whatever to follow the matter up, but went down a side street and took off my collar and shook myself. So I'd evidently come on a lot since the Dickford days. Then, being fed to the teeth with general foolishness, and no business being likely to be transacted in the midst of it, I shut up shop and ran over to Bristol, where a decent sobriety hangs permanently over the town like a fog.
Really?
And got a further consignment of sandal from the Tibetan. I asked him where he hailed from, but he only smiled. I asked him if he came from the hills, and his eyes lit up and he nodded. Then back to the farm, and Molly frightfully intrigued by the sandalwood. She was a business-like young woman, and had got hold of a farmer and had other stuff hauled already. So, when the evening came chill off the sea, we made a little fire of Azrael in the living room and sat together to watch it. And Molly told me of what she'd been doing all these weeks while I had been too busy to attend to her, and perhaps, if the truth were known, too full of myself.
She had been communing with the moon, as Morgan had instructed, and she had got a lot, but had found, like I had, that it was too abstract to be of any practical use. I told her the trick of the magical images and how they enabled one to get a purchase on things. And though they might not be essential, they were uncommonly useful. She said, weren't they hallucinations? I said yes, they probably were, but that was nothing against them, so long as they did their job. Then we talked of the priest of the moon, and I found myself speaking of him as if he were real as Morgan and the Treaths. He might be a hallucination, but he was on the job all right. We both felt him as we talked of him. Molly asked if he would flop letters out our noses.
On our noses? Like
if he would flop letters on our noses, like the Mahatmas did with the meme.
Madame Blavatsky. What on earth is she talking about?
We both felt him as we talked, and Molly asked if he would flop letters on our noses, like the Mahatmas did to Madame Blavatsky, and I said I hoped not. I had had enough things thrown at me for one day. I judged from her remark, however, that she had been making use of her time by reading Morgan's books. Then, for the first time since Morgan's passing, I took pencil in hand and began to draw. I drew the priest of the moon for her as I remembered him, in my sea picture, sitting on the throne of the sea in the deep sea palace, and the eyes came alive, even in black and white, in just the same way they had done before. But somehow I could not do the curling waves that have arched over the sky, but instead there stood up on his either hand these two great pillars of polarity that are on the porchway to the entrance of King Solomon's temple, black and silver pillars.
Boaz and
Yakin. And upon their capitals rested the terrestrial and celestial spheres. The fire of Azrael burnt low in the hearth and fell apart in the caves of the flames as it did in the days of Morgan Le Fay, the pale ash of juniper gleaming golden in the mist. Its incense odor drifted over the room, and I thought of the fort and caught myself listening unawares for the sound of the sea working among the rocks, unresting as ever out there on the point. But instead there came to me through the open windows another sea voice that I had not heard before, the pattern and rustle of light surf on the shingles as the tide closed round the narrow land where stood the farm. It was all different here from the fort, and yet it was taking on a life of its own. There was more of earth and less of sea here than out at the point, just as there was more of earth in Molly than in Morgan. Yet it was cosmic earth, and I remembered that the goddess ruled both the moon and the earth and the sea. Molly would never be a sea priestess like Morgan, but there was an awakening in her, something of the primordial women, and it was beginning to answer the need in me.
Right.
Molly, in her selfless, tireless, courageous giving, was the eternal mother, and the eternal child in me went out to her.
It was a beginning, but it was not enough. I should never have been faithful to her without a struggle if there were all there were to it. But there was something more than that, and although we neither of us know quite what it was, we were feeling our way towards it. But there seemed to be a great gulf fixed between us and the invisible realities we sought. Unless we could cross it, I felt that we were doomed to perish, and I think that Molly felt it too, for she spoke of these things with a sort of desperation that reminded me of a starving fish in an aquarium hitting its nose against the glass.
He's very lovely to her.
And we sat and talked in the dusk as the fire sank lower. Something was needed to swing us across that gulf, but what it was we did not know. We fell silent in the gathering dark and sat and looked into the fire. Outside, the sea was working among the shingle, for the tide was high tonight. We could hear the soft crashing and rustling of the breaking waves coming nearer and nearer. They had never sounded so close before. It seemed as if they must be right under the garden wall. I was on the point of getting up and going out to see what was happening when I heard the bells in the water and knew this was no earthly tide we were hearing.
Yeah.
A long ray of moonlight came through the open window, uncurtained to the mild night, and the blend of moonlight and firelight was very strange and dazzled the eyes. The moonlight fell upon the fire and made it look like an opal amidst its grey ash. The curling smoke and its shadows took on the appearance of squirming creatures rising out of the coals, and I remembered the medieval tales of salamanders. The odour of the incense woods kept on coming to us in wafts, but it seemed to me as if the fire must be smoking a good deal. Meanwhile, the sound of the sea filled the room till it hummed like a shell. Something uncanny was afoot, and Molly knew it just as well as I did. Then suddenly we saw that where the moonlight fell upon the smoke, a form was taking shape. The smoke no longer rose in slow eddying whirls, but hung in folds like drapery. I watched it rise in front of the chimney breast as if the fire were smoking, and then out of the formless soft grey we saw a head and shoulders emerge, and the priest of the moon stood before us as I had so often seen him with the mind's eye, with his shaven head and ascetic hawk's face. The eyes were dark and sparkling and very much alive. The moonlight and smoke were amorphous, but the eyes were not. Then he began to speak as he had spoken in the rite out of the fort.
Whether we heard with the inner ear or saw with the inner eye, or whether it was the eyes and ears of flesh that apprehended him, I do not know. It was more like a waking dream than anything else, and yet it was clear cut as a diamond. I saw it was to Molly that he was speaking, and that I was a mere spectator, and I remembered that in the most ancient times, when the great Isis was worshipped, it was the women who were dynamic, and it was not until corruption came upon the pagan world that the priests took all the power. And as I sat there, listening to the voice of the shadows and watching Molly listen, I thought of the house of virgins in lost Atlantis, and how the ancient priests must have talked like this to the young girls sitting at their feet under the incense trees in the walled courts around the lotus tanks, telling them what was expected of them and how it must be done and why, and then of the cloaked journey by the underground way to the great temple. The young girl was taken silently from beside her sleeping comrades, going and returning without waking them, and I wondered which was the more scary way of dealing. Scary? Oh, sacred way of dealing with sex, that or the way of the nuns. I heard the voice of the priest going on and on, talking to his young priestess, and it seemed to me that I was sinking back into the same state I had been in when I traveled to the boat of the dead over the underworld waters, and I wondered whether on my return I should see Molly glow all golden as I had seen Morgan do. The rhythmical speaking of the priest set something vibrating in me, and I wondered what Molly was making of it all as she lay low in her chair, gazing up with rapt attention at the shadowy form standing over her, luminous with its own light, the dark, sparkling eyes amid the shadows, for it was a thing of which one understood, or little according to the knowledge
Understood
one brought
much
to
or
it.
little according to the knowledge one brought to it.
And
If you
even-
know, you know.
Right. And even as the queen of Hades is the daughter of the great mother, so from this great sea writheth the golden Aphrodite, giver of love, and she also is Isis after another manner. Equilibrium is fixed in inertia until outer space oversets the balance and the All-Father pours forth to satisfy the hunger space. Strange and deep are these truths. Verily are the keys to the lives of men and women, unknown to those that worship not the great gods. Golden Aphrodite cometh not as the virgin, the victim, but as the awakener, the desirous one. As outer space she calls, and the All-Fathers commence the worship. She awaketh him to desire, and the worlds are created. Lo, she is the awakener. How powerful is she, golden Aphrodite, the awakener of manhood.
The voice paused, and I thought of the travesties of the golden Aphrodite who rules as divinities in bars and bonbon boxes, and remembered the words of the Samaragine tablet, as above, so below, and thought how creation and procreation mirror each other. Then the voice began again. But all these things are one thing. All the goddesses are one goddess, and we call her Isis, the all-woman, in whose nature all natural things are found, virgin and desirous by turn, giver of life and bringer in of death. She is the cause of creation, for she awakeneth the desire of the All-Father, and for her sake he createth. Likewise, the wise call all women Isis. I think she's a bit of a soft polytheist, isn't she? In the face of every woman, let man look for the features of the great goddess, watching her phases through the flow and return of the tides to which his soul answereth, listening for her call.
I somehow think her and Maxwell are never going to have a normal life. But
Oh,
anyway.
normal's just a setting on your dryer, and that ship sailed a long time ago. He was speaking to Molly as if he stood again.
Oh, daughters of Isis, adore the goddess.
Oh, daughters of Isis, adore the goddess in her name, give the call that awakens and rejoices. So shall ye be blessed of the goddess and live with fullness of life. He was speaking to Molly as he stood again in the courts of the Temple of the Sun, and she were a virgin preparing for the ordeal that should make her a moon priestess. Now this is the rite of worship of Isis. Let the priestess show forth the goddess to the worshipper. Let her assume the crown of the underworld. Let her arise all glorious and golden from the sea of the primordial, and call to him that loveth her to come forth and come unto her. Let her do these things in the name of the goddess, and she shall be even as the goddess unto him, for the goddess will speak through her. All powerful shall she be in the inner as crowned Persephone, and all glorious in the outer as golden Aphrodite. So shall she be a priestess in the eyes of the worshipper of the goddess, who by his faith and dedication shall find the goddess in her. For the rite of Isis is life, and that which is done as a rite shall show forth in life. By this rite the goddess is drawn down to her worshippers. Her power enters into them, and they become the sustenance of the sacrament. He fell silent and stood looking at Molly, as if wondering how much she had understood and how much she could or would do, for she lay back in her chair, dazed and helpless, and only her eyes answered him. Then the moonlight faded, and a shift of the shore wind silenced the sea, and we were alone in the darkness, Molly and I. For the priest of the moon had gone, and in the darkness we sat together silently for a long while. From that silent, formless communing we came back knowing many things.
And as I took Molly in my arms, in the way I had never done before, something suddenly flowed between us like warm light. It enriched us in a single aura, so that our lives mingled and interchanged and stimulated each other and then flowed back to us, and I was reminded of the flow of the interchange of force that had taken place in the rite I had worked with Morgan. We just stood there silently in front of the fire, now sunk to a dull red glow. Neither could see the other. We were almost unaware of each other. Then suddenly I felt the thing that Molly was letting flow out to me, and unservedly in her giving, and knew that it was the same thing that Morgan had invoked deliberately by her strange knowledge, and that it was using ignorant, innocent Molly because the conditions of her soul were right for it. She being a woman and in love.
And the sex was that good even the neighbours smoked a cigarette. There you go. So I think that's where we're up to. They seem to have turned on womanhood, and she's not being a shrinking violet, but say no more, say no more.
Alrighty.
I'm thinking Violet Frith was a little frustrated in certain respects between you, me, and the gatepost. We shall figure it out.
It was interesting though, because you realize that this is written 10, 12 years prior to The Charge of the Goddess by Dorian Valiente.
Absolutely.
So there's some interesting.
Well, the Emerald Tablet's been around a bit longer than that, but the Charge of the Goddess, the way the couplets and all that kind of stuff. There is, but.
All right, I think we're going to finish next time.
I think we are, because there's no way we can finish the book tonight. There's no way we can.
I think we'll go on to the goat-footed god.
We're going to do them all, and we'll check them out. Actually, I've enjoyed this book.
It
got a bit weird at one point. You thought it was all wrong, but
the words are impossibly put together, so your tongue is all twisted up the whole time.
It's difficult because it's written in Edwardian.
I don't know. 30s.
Edwardian English.
20s,
I want to say something like that. It's not how we speak, and it's difficult to get a frame of reference and some hellacious run-on sentences there that seem to go on for about a week and all over the place. So.
All right, so good night, Susan, Carol, Wendy, and Cass. And
yes, thank you for joining us.
Soon.
Thank you for joining us. And for those of you that are joining later, well, you're going to enjoy it. But you did enjoy it because we're right at the end. So there.
All right,
we'll
have
see
a
you
good
next
night,
time.
Everybody.
Yeah, we're off to chill for a bit now because we're tired.
We're going to have some bread. I baked some nice bread today.
Well, that'd be good. That'd be good then.
Bye.
So thank you so much. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Bye for now.